Okay, so this is the fun bit now. We get to actually start shading our plants here. So with our setup so far, we're just using our temporary red shader we exported with our proxy. I do actually quite like the red contrasting against the blue, but obviously we're going to do better than this, and we're going to actually set up some proper materials and proper colors for our different plants now. So we can override our shader, and to start with, let's just use our old instance shader and override back onto this. Now this might seem a bit stupid because we had our instance shader, we've exported with this temporary shader, and now we're putting our old shader back on again. But I did just want to show us how we can override materials that are baked into our proxy. And often it's a good idea to put like sort of a simpler shader on that's not going to take too long to render. This can kind of help just with sort of debugging things as you're setting up your overall scene geometry. So let's now go back in and set up our override. So if we go into our setup here, close that for a second. Let's go down to the bottom here, just under where we set our instance file, and let's put down a material SOP, like so. Let's open up our browser here, and let's just select our old material, which was our instances shader. Now, if we were to, let's just open this into a new tab here. If I press render now, you can see nothing changes. Now the reason for this is because the material SOP is just going to set a primitive attribute on our geometry. And of course, we don't have any primitives, we just have points here. So if we come to our attribute spreadsheet here, you can see if we come to our primitives, we do have the attribute, but there's nothing there. So luckily Redshift is able to read this as a point attribute instead. So let's just set this to point attribute. And now our shop material path, which is what it's called, you can see it's now on our points. And there it is, material instances. So with that, if we press render, we can see we have got our shader now, but none of the colors that we had originally are coming through. So this is because essentially this brown is just the translucency we had in our shader set before. If we come to our shader itself, so material instances, you can remember we are taking our color from our points, and we are just trying to use that, but it's just coming in as black. Now we do have a load of attributes we exported with our proxy. In fact, if we just were to copy this node, you might remember we exported curve view as well. Incidentally, as well as using particle lookup, so this is rs point attribute, you can bring in your attributes with this. You can also use rs user data. So you've got color user data, integer, scalar, and vector. So you can also bring this in the same way. This is kind of the newer way. This is kind of the old school way. You can use either, to be honest, but I'm just working with this one for now. So the rs point attribute. So as I say, we had our curve view that was exported with our Redshift proxy. If I put curve view here, it was a float attribute. So let's say out scalar. You can use out color, but just to be correct, let's use our scalar, which is just the float value of it. And you can definitely see we've got attributes here. So this is our curve view of our attribute along our curves. So that's definitely working. But again, if we were trying to use our CD, we get nothing. So what's going on here? So at the moment, we can definitely use any attribute that's on our Redshift proxy, but our color is actually coming in from our points. So if we want to use attributes that are on our points, we actually need to override this on our proxy. So to do this, we're going to come up to our top level here. We're going to select the actual geometry that's rendering these instances, which is our render instances. Let's come up here to the top. Under Redshift object, we're going to go to proxy, and we're going to enable override user data. And what this is going to do, it's going to essentially allow us to override our proxy's attributes with attributes that are on the points themselves. So the color that is now here can be read and picked up by the geometry that is in our Redshift proxies. So let's go back to our render view. Let's come back to our material and instances. Let's press render again. You can see we're now getting our color here. Now we still have access to all the attributes that we exported with our proxy, so our curve view is still there. But it is important to remember that we're now overriding attributes on our proxy. So if you have a curve view attribute on your points, this is going to overwrite the attribute that's in our proxy. So just make sure you don't have, say, a curve view attribute on your points now. So now we've got this, let's connect up this whole setup to our main shader, and you can see we've now got our color back. So currently we're just reading our color from our points and setting this on our shader. I want to get a bit more control from this, so I'm going to create an attribute that we can drive a Redshift ramp with, and then we can choose our colors a bit more intuitively inside the shader. Now this attribute is going to be based on our variant that we set up earlier, so it's going to be different for each plant. And in fact, I'm actually just going to take the variant and remap it to be a value between 0 and 1. And we can then use this to control our Redshift ramp. So that's what we're going to do next. Let's come back to our main object setup. Let's come to our setup here, and just down at the bottom, or maybe, yeah, let's just put it at the bottom, create a new point attribute. Point wrangle even. And we currently have, as I've said a number of times, a variant that goes between 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 4. So if I was to take our variant attribute and divide it by the maximum number, which is 4, we're actually going to get a value between 0 and 1. And this is perfect because a Redshift ramp can read a value between 0 and 1 and map that to a color range. So let's just come here and let's just say set. We're going to create an attribute called colorVar, I think. It can be called anything you like, but colorVar I think is what I'm going to go for. So let's say float attribute colorVar equals, and we're going to say I attribute variant, and we're going to divide this by 4, which is our maximum number of variants. Now, if we were to come to our geometry spreadsheet, and I'm just going to type star var star, so it's going to search for everything that's got var in it. You can see it's not actually working at the moment. We've got results going from 0 or 1. And the reason for this is because both of these, this attribute here and this number are both integers. So they're just whole numbers with no decimal place. Now, in order to actually calculate something that's a float value, so it does have decimal places, we need to make sure at least one of these is a float value. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cast our variant to be a float instead of an integer. And essentially if I type float, and then in brackets, our variant, now this is going to be 2.0 instead of 2, or 3.0 instead of 3. And when we divide it by 4, we get a float result. So now we've got numbers going between 0, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 1. So we have a different value now based on that variant, which is basically different for each plant. So let's go back to our Redshift render view. Let's come to our material. Let's come to our instances. And let's just alt drag a copy of our particle attribute lookup here. Let's call this colorVar. Let's just take our output scalar, because again it's a float, and just connect that to our surface of our Redshift material. Let's refresh our view. And you can see we've now got a value that runs between black and white over each of our different plants. Okay, so if we were to connect this now to a Redshift ramp, we can now colorize this for example. Let's just set that back to grayscale for now. And let's just connect this up to our diffuse color of our shader. Let's connect the output of our material here to our output of our redshift material. And I think I'm going to just delete these ones now. Not going to use those. I'm also going to come to our material and I'm going to set our backlighting translucency color just to be completely desaturated and white. So we're not tinting this any particular color now. While it does look nice, it's kind of throwing us off here. Okay, so with that enabled, let's now set some colors on our redshift ramp. I'm going to select both of these and set this to be constant. So now we just have single knots that we can select. And I think I'm just going to connect this for now to our actual output of our shader so that we can just see the raw colors. And let's just fill this in with some just temporary colors just so we can see where we are with our knots. Let's set this first knot here to be red. Slide this up. So that's just our end plant there. Let's create another knot here. Let's make that blue. So that's our second plant. Let's make another knot about here. Click on that, make that yellow. Let's take another knot here. Let's make that green. And then our last one here is black. So this is kind of like the spacing we're going to use for our different colors. And each one of these colors is now a different one of these plants. And how many plants you have depends on how many knots you would need. But essentially we're just using that color var that we just created to drive the position along the curve. So these colors are obviously horrible. Let's just connect this up to see what horrible mess we've made. So with that done, let's now actually try and set these correctly. So I think I am going to start with these little small ones here. I'm going to go for maybe like a beigey color, something quite neutral and desaturated. Maybe something a bit brighter. Let's go for something like that. I think for these ones here, the ones that are green, I'm going to go for something dark bluish. Just going to block in some colors quickly. Kind of like the idea of keeping generally our sort of palette here quite desaturated and muted, but having a little pop of color perhaps somewhere. So let's take our yellow one and I'm going to bring this to be maybe blue again. Slightly brighter. Let's take this one, let's maybe make it red, pink. And let's take the last one, let's just go for like a bright white color, so quite desaturated. Maybe not fully saturated. Let's bring the value down a bit to about 75. And in fact, this pink, let's just try something else. I think something like this is quite cool. As well as this, let's also look at our material at the moment. We've got our backlighting and translucency. It's currently set to be white. It's quite high, so you can see if I bring this down, bring it up, that's what we've got. I think I'm actually going to set our translucency color just to be a slightly desaturated version of what we have here. So let's put down a color correct, RS color correct. Let's connect up our input to our output color. Let's take our output color and connect that to our translucency color. I'm also going to bring our saturation scale down just a bit, just so it's not quite as intense in those colors there. So now we've got this, we could bring that up or down to refine it a bit more. Maybe leave it about 6.5 or 0.65. Let's just refine these colors a little bit more now. So I think I might make this a little bit warmer. This is our sort of beigey color at the bottom. Let's take the next one. I think maybe just desaturate that a little bit more. I think our kind of grasses one here, I want to make that quite light, desaturated. So bring down the saturation further. Maybe bring down the value a little bit. being quite picky here. Maybe increase the blue. But it's a very sort of subtle thing, this. The yellow, I think I'm going to go more into the orange or something a bit like this. Maybe bring down that saturation a little bit and bring down the value a little bit. Don't want colours to be clipping straight all the way into the ones here. I think for the white, let's just leave it about that, but something like this. Looking at this, I think I also want to adjust our lighting a little bit. At the moment it feels a little bit flat. Let's go back up to our object level. So if we were to go to our different lights here, let's just have a look. If I enable the view on this, you can see we had our light dome. We've got our top light. Let's just name that top. Let's name our bottom light bottom. And so now we have this. Let's just check this and see if we can adjust our lighting a little bit more. So with our top light, I'm going to, let's just turn these off a sec, just check these individually. I think I'm going to bring up the top light a bit more. Let's just try 20, doubling it. Probably a little bit too strong now. Let's bring back this, bring back our light dome. Quite like checking the sort of values of our lights individually and then sort of bringing them together and seeing how they mix. I like this, but it feels too hot now. Let's go somewhere in between. So maybe around 14. Let's just check that against what it was at 10. I think that's just added a nice little bit of sort of rim lighting to the top there, which kind of helps shape this a little bit more. So we're going to save this as 15. And let's go back to our material shader now, back to our instances. Just going to refine this ramp just a little bit more. Now we have our new lighting. So I think for our bushy ones here, I think I might just take the color a little bit more into the sort of cyan color. I think this one, I feel like this is all very blue, so maybe I'm going to shift this a bit more into the green. I quite like having that little extra touch of green in there now. Maybe I bring up the value a little bit so they're a little bit brighter. Maybe a little bit more desaturated. Let's see this yellow. I think I'm just going to bring down the value a little bit more. And maybe our white one at the end, maybe bring it down just a little bit more as well. It's super picky, I know, but it's kind of, as I say, it's a very fine balance. I do like having this kind of variation here that has some sort of desaturated colors and then having this little pop. I might just try and see how this looks if I change this around. Let's make perhaps these ones on the end yellow, seeing if that looks better. Which is pretty cool, but maybe a little bit much now. Perhaps we could also try this maybe with some of the grasses. Let's swap those two around. That feels too much. Let's swap that one with the second one. Honestly, I could spend all day on this. I really love just sort of doing look development like this. Once you have this set up with a ramp, it's quite nice and easy to just go and mess around with your colors and try as many variations as you like. And if you do like a variation and you want to save it, just Alt drag out your ramp as a copy, and then you can always feel free to go on and adjust some more. And if you mess it up, you can go back to your saved copy here. So with this said and done, I think we're going to wrap this up. I'm going to maybe just desaturate that one last little bit more, maybe not. I think I've done enough. Let's have a quick look through some of the other frames. Back to the start. Nice, I'm liking it. So with this now set up as it is at the moment, I'm going to move on now and we're going to set up our actual growth along our branch next.